So, like this extra space here on the bottom is what you're talking about?
Right, because right now I
And
think I
like,
have it set to be at the top, so that way it looks a little bit cleaner when people are doing the data entry.
yeah, because you might want to remove, um, so it's giving you the height. Sometimes what happens is when you have the height, um, it adds extra padding around the, um, I don't want to mess with it since it's a live project, but if like if the cell height should be like 16, but you have it at 28, it's going to automatically just add the extra space to it. So even if you set the margins to 0, um, it might. Let me see if I can do this real quick so I can show you.
Because when I highlight the table itself, the width and the height are blank on REDCap. And so like I've gone in and I've tried to like put in what I think the width should be, and like
Yeah.
it'll
So
automatically go back to blank.
if you're doing it in a table, here's the thing: you're adding CSS for.
You're going to have trouble there.
Yeah. um,
Are you creating? You want to create a new field, man?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
Yeah,
okay.
I saw that I was in the record ID there.
Yeah.
So here's the thing: if you're adding, the CSS module was before they allowed you to. Oh, so you're not using the CSS module, are you?
Well, I requested access, I had it, and then it went away, so I don't know if I just need to re-add it, enable it at the top of the green.
But she doesn't need it now, right?
Yeah. So if you're doing it in the, I just want to see what you had configured in here. Oh, you haven't had it set up. So, so with the CSS module, that was before they did the rich text editor and the field embedding within the field. So before you could do this in REDCap, you would have to use Shazam and the CSS module to mimic this. But now that they have the rich text editor and the field embedding, you can do this natively. You don't have to have the modules. So the thing is, with what I like to do is scale everything back, and because sometimes with CSS it's cascading style sheets, so it's properties that cascade, and so if something is assigned a value later, it overrides a value that was assigned previously, and some things cancel each other out. So for example, like you may have like this height. You don't necessarily have to specify the height, and it might, and the thing is with REDCap, it does it automatically for you a lot of the times. So just for this first one, I'm just going to delete the height for all 4 of the yeah. So this is one table row that I'm messing with here, and then I'm going to take the height off of the table. And usually you can see if that changes anything, but I'm going to look in the, I'm just going to add a record so I can see how it displays. Because you can inspect the height. Let me move my, if we scroll down here and we go into one of these tables, you should be able to see. So you can see here that there's padding on around that table data element.
Okay.
You can see that there's 5 pixels of padding on either side and 3 pixels on the top. And then if we click on the actual H6, it's giving you a margin of 8. So so if we go back to the design view of this, and this is the thing with REDCap, some of these values get assigned. So you're not specifically stating that you want this padding and this margin, but because you're using an H6, it's automatically giving you because of the style sheet that REDCap is using, it's automatically assigning a bottom margin to the element with the CSS that they're using. So if I save this, you're not going to see any change because I didn't apply it across the whole thing. But if I save this and I go back to here and we look at the first one, it should have a margin of 0. And this is how I work when I do this, is I look at these individual things here. So if you set this to 0 in here, you can see how now it's showing up at, it's going to the middle. Does that make sense? Do you see how that's?
Yeah, I'm just scared to do that.
Well, if you do it here, if you do it in this, it only displays the active web page. So if I refresh this again, then that value is back. So here so it doesn't, when you do things in the inspect window like this, it only shows you what's active. It doesn't change your design here. But the reason I do this is because then you can figure out where things are being assigned and what needs to be changed. And this is where you could use the CSS injector, which might help instead of having to do each one of these, because if we look at the H6 styling here, it's giving you a margin. Yeah, so like the margin bottom here is half, and then it's assigning it. So it's assigning it up here. So you could say anything for an H6, you want the margin set to 0. So if we did, so if we just did H6 margin 0 per. So now you can see that it basically removed all the padding, all the margin from each one of these. So if we go back to the dev tools here, it's showing my my rule up here that I just created. So like I said, with cascading style sheets, so whatever's on the top, I mean, it cascades down, but the way it is everything that's anything that's higher is what's being applied and overriding anything that's below it. So you can see here that now this margin bottom is crossed out because we're overriding it with this one. So if I take this off, you can see here now that it turns this back on. Does that make sense?
Okay, so the using the CSS injector, even though it's an external module, like it'll be okay.
Yeah, so the CSS, so you can still use the module. It saves you from having to go in and because you don't have to use the module, but with the module you can apply a single rule all at once, whereas instead you would have to go into each one of these H6s and say margin bottom 0 important padding. You know, you would have to copy this entire rule and paste it for every one of these H6s. And if you decide you don't want that anymore, you want to change it, you would have to go in and manually update each one of these. Whereas with the injector, you only have to put in this one little bit of code. And I can copy and paste that in chat.
That'd be great, yeah. Okay, because yeah, it's too big of a project to have to go back and do that all individually.
And the other thing is so be careful when you do things like that, because this will apply to the entire project unless you specify which form. Okay. And so because like an H6 could be used on like your headings and all sorts of other things that you may not have noticed, like here, if there's padding for an H6 up here, it's gonna affect things that are outside of it might affect things that are outside of the form. So sometimes you want to limit where things are or how things get applied, and you would do that with, so there's this little breadcrumb trail down here at the bottom, and you could have what I usually do is I'll use the class tag for that, so the design-test, or something that limits it to just a specific area. So each one of this is basically the breadcrumb of all the tags that we go in through here. So if it's an H6, it's going to affect all H6s. But if we do like TD and H6, it's only going to affect the H6 elements within a table data element. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So what I would do is I would just tinker with the inspector, and I would, you can apply a rule like this and then just see if it fixes your problem. And if it doesn't, you might just look at the inspector and see if you have to be more specific or less specific, or, if you want to target something specifically. And I mean, it can get complicated, but if you're just trying to get rid of the margins, the other thing is that could also help you is if you don't use an H6. Because if you got rid of the H6 tags for all these, it would automatically get rid of the styling that the H6 is being applied to. Does that make sense? Okay. So because the other thing is if you want the size of an H6, but you don't want all the styling that comes with an H6 tag, you can just use the paragraph tag and then just make the font size like larger. So you would say like font that kind of thing. And you would just, the other thing is you would have to do or you could do like 18 pixels. The only problem with that is you would have to do it for every one of these. But if that's a rule you want, you could just do that here. So if I said p tags would be and I usually put the important here because sometimes REDCap likes to overwrite things, but when you make it important, then that overrides everything. Okay. So if we save this, if I just took out this and we save this as a p tag, for all these.
It'll get there.
While it's thinking, like, as somebody who's never done anything like this ever before, is there like a particular class or like online anything besides what you guys offer to like learn how to do this?
To learn, like,
learn the lingo. Like, it is so over my head that I'm trying to learn the language backwards, you know?
What I usually do is it's W3 Schools. Because they have, so for CSS, they have a bunch of tutorials on CSS, just how to learn CSS. And then you can, as you go through, you just get more complex as you go down here. So this is what I would recommend. And this is what I like to go to because you can have examples. Like they'll give you an example. So if we wanted to just color this red, you know, you could see example code and you can see how that gets changed. You know, what changes what and where. So this is the HTML here and this is the CSS. And this has this. So actually, well, this is all the HTML. The way they have this is set up for these demos is that it's inline CSS instead of it being separate in a CSS file. So, because what REDCap does is it has its own CSS style sheets, and then when you use the injector, it basically creates a style sheet for the injector that overrides other things.
But you can see how that's saved for your P tags.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it should have made the font bigger, and for some reason it didn't.
That's okay. This is great.
But yeah, so and then you know what I always do is I like to go to the inspect tool here is like it's the only reason I can get all this stuff done is because I can see how things are being applied, and I can see the styles that are being applied, and I can see this is what's called the box model for CSS. This is your element, your padding, your border margins, and so you can see if any of these have values to them, because sometimes a value is being assigned that you're not assigning, but it's being applied somehow, like this margin here. And you can see, and what I like about Chrome and Firefox is that they color code these, so you can see the orange, you know, and the green here for the padding. So you could see what values need to be fixed, and you can see how this MRN is using an H6 and it's automatically getting an 8, that kind of thing. So unfortunately with CSS, a lot of it is trial and error and nailing things down, but if we figure out where the problem is, like we did with the H6 here, you could use the CSS module to create a rule that applies to all of those H6 tags instead of you having to manually do it one by one.
Thank you.
And if you have any CSS questions or anything, you can always email me directly, and we can look at projects, and I can, you know, if you have a question on what to do or how, hey, you know, this is doing this and I wanted to do this, feel free to email me and we can walk through your project, and I can always help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks for the question.